The candles in the drawing room had been lit too early, as though Malfoy Manor itself had begun to fear the dark. Their flames shivered in tall silver branches and gave the gilt mirrors a funeral sheen. The pale marble floor, once so spotless it had seemed almost cold with pride, now held the soft gray stains of hurried boots, dropped ash, owl dirt, not cleaned quite quickly enough. Outside the long windows, evening pooled beneath clipped hedges and under the white sweep of the peacock lawn. Inside, Narcissa Malfoy stood so still beside the mantel that she might have been one more ancestral figure carved into the house, narrow and severe and beautiful, until one noticed how hard she held her own hands. Draco had never seen his mother appear diminished. Even when owls came day after day with whispers dressed as sympathy and gossip disguised as concern, she had carried her name as though it were armor. Tonight, the armor had thinned. Lucius Malfoy remained in Azkaban, and every corridor in the house knew it. Servants stepped softly, portraits muttered behind their frames. The house elves did not sing in the kitchens. The place felt less like a home than a throat waiting to swallow something alive. Bellatrix Lestrange laughed quietly when she saw how Draco held himself. "Stand straight, dear nephew," she said, moving around him in her black dress like a scrap of storm cloud with a woman's shape. "If he means to honor you, do try not to resemble prey." "Be silent, Bella," Narcissa said. Bellatrix lifted her brows, delighted. Still, the elder sister, even now. Draco said nothing. He was 16 years old and dressed as if dressing mattered. Black suit, clean cuffs, family signet on his right hand. It had seemed important, an hour earlier, to look composed, to look like a son who might redeem a father. Now, he felt the absurdity of it. Cloth could not stiffen his spine. Silver could not slow his pulse. The room smelled of beeswax and old smoke and something else beneath it, something metallic and damp, as if fear had its own odor and had come to live in the house. The fire in the grate changed color. It went from ordinary orange to a thin and livid green. The portraits nearest it withdrew into their painted corners. Bellatrix straightened. Narcissa lowered her eyes. Voldemort stepped out of the flames as though he had been shaped by them. He wore traveling black without ornament, and the lack of ornament made him seem more terrible, not less. His skin was colorless in the candlelight. His red eyes moved over the room with a patient appetite. Nagini's long body looped once around his shoulders, then slid silently down to the floor and settled at his feet. "My lord," Narcissa whispered. He did not answer her at once. His attention had fallen on Draco. It was strange, being looked at by that face. One did not feel seen. One felt selected. "So," Voldemort said softly, "the sun." Draco lowered himself into a bow before his knees gave way beneath him. "My lord, your father wished very much to serve me well." Voldemort drifted farther into the room. He mistook eagerness for usefulness. Many do. Bellatrix gave a fervent little sound of agreement. Narcissa's fingers tightened together until the knuckles blanched. "He failed me," Voldemort went on, almost musingly. "A prophecy lost. Ministry incompetence. The indignity of prison. One would think blood ought to guarantee quality. But it appears even old families produce disappointment." "No, yeah." The words were not directed at Narcissa, yet she took them like blows. Draco felt it. He felt every humiliation laid at the family door, every whispered joke behind gloved hands, every paper-thin condolence from women at formal dinners. Rage flared in him, familiar and useless. Voldemort smiled without warmth. "Shall I tell you what mercy looks like, Draco?" His name spoken that way made Draco colder than if the room had filled with winter water. "Yes, my lord." "Mercy," said Voldemort, "is opportunity. I give your house one more chance to prove that it deserves to continue." Draco knew, before the task was spoken, that it would be impossible. He knew it as one knows the downward drop on a stair one has missed in the dark. His body understood before his mind consented. At Hogwarts, Voldemort said. There's a headmaster who has irritated me for too long. The room became very quiet. Albus Dumbledore has grown old, he said. His reputation continues out of habit. A tedious wizard. Clever, perhaps, but fatally sentimental. You will remove him. And Draco heard his own breath catch. Bellatrix made a sound like a woman offered jewels. My lord, Narcissa began, and stopped at once when Voldemort turned his face toward her. Draco tasted iron. He had imagined many things when he imagined service. The childish fantasies had always been bright with triumph, full of masks and whispered respect, and his father restored at the head of the table. Even his fears had been vague. They had not included this. Not murder. Not an old man on a tower. Not a soul asked to cross a line from which it could not be called back. My lord, he said, and hated the tremor in his voice. I will serve you. But that? Voldemort said pleasantly. Draco looked at the floor, at Nagina's coils, at the distorted gold reflection of candlelight in the marble. He could not say I cannot kill. The words seemed too naked, too much like placing his throat under a blade of his own accord. I am not fit for that, he said instead. Bellatrix laughed outright. Hear him. He wants fitness. Voldemort's expression did not change. How fortunate, he said. Then you may become fit. He reached out a white hand. Narcissa moved without meaning to, a mother's reflex more primitive than caution. Bellatrix seized her wrist. Draco stayed where he was because his legs had ceased to belong to him. Your father's death, Voldemort murmured, will be written into his son. His fingers closed around Draco's forearm. The sleeve was yanked back. Then came pain. No story he had heard had prepared him for it. The dark mark was not carved. Not exactly. It was poured. Fire and acid and winter all at once sank into his flesh, twisted there, and made of his nerves a thing that screamed without sound. He might have cried out. He remembered only Bellatrix's ecstatic breathing, Narcissa's gasp smothered behind her hand, the smell of scorched skin, the sense that something had entered him which would never fully leave. When Voldemort released him, Draco almost fell. The mark on his arm stood black and vivid against blanched skin, skull and serpent, obscene in its elegance. There, Voldemort said. Now you are what you ought to be. Draco stared at the thing branded into him. It moved, or seemed to. The mouth of the skull looked ready to speak. He thought, wildly, of all the times he had bragged in whispers with other boys about becoming one of the chosen. He would have given anything to go back and strike those words out of the air before they had ever been said. Voldemort moved past him toward the hearth. You will be given a year, he said. Success will redeem your father. Failure will inconvenience your mother. Do not force me to define inconvenience. Narcissa bowed her head lower. Bellatrix smiled at Draco with feverish pride. Our blood holds after all. Voldemort paused before stepping into the green fire. One more thing, he said, not looking back. Do not confuse reluctance with refusal. One can be corrected, the other is terminal. Then he was gone. For several seconds, nothing in the room moved except the candles. Narcissa crossed the distance first. She knelt before Draco on the marble and gathered his burned arm into both hands as if she could cool it by force of touch. The gesture might have shamed him more than the mark if it had not hurt so much to breathe. Bellatrix prowled to the sideboard and poured herself wine. It is an honor, Bellatrix said. You should thank him when next you see him. Narcissa did not look up. Leave us. Bellatrix laughed again. This is why you have always disappointed me, sissy. You hear destiny and answer with nursery manners. I said leave us. To Draco's astonishment, Bellatrix did. Not obediently, and not without a muttered remark about weak stomachs and weaker sons. But she went. The door shut behind her with a softness more contemptuous than a slam. Narcissa pressed a cooling charm to his arm. Draco hissed through his teeth. Do not let them hear you say it again, she said quietly. What? That you are not fit. He looked at her. Her face was white and terrible, the face of a woman who had gone past fear into arithmetic. She was calculating days, possibilities, allies, distances, lies. He knew that expression. It had ruled dinner tables and settlements and marriages. To see it now bent toward survival made him feel suddenly older and far more alone. I won't do it, he said. She closed her eyes briefly. Do not be foolish. I am not being foolish. I am being clear. His voice broke anyway. I am not killing him. You think that matters to him? You think he asked because he expects your conscience to survive? Nah. I don't care what he expects. You should care very much, Narcissa said. And there was for an instant something like anger under her control. Your father is in Azkaban. He has given us this because he enjoys what it will do to us. He wants you frightened. He wants me begging. He wants the family shamed whether you succeed or fail. The only power left to us is in how convincingly we move. Draco tried to stand and failed. The room tilted. The mark on his arm throbbed with every beat of his heart. Then let him kill me. That startled her. The emotion showed only in the tiniest recoil, but he saw it. No, she said. If this is service, then let him. No. He laughed once, a broken and ugly sound. What do you propose? That I practice on birds? I propose, Narcissa said, rising in a smooth, cold motion. That we do not die tonight by speaking like children in front of my sister. She moved toward the writing desk. Draco watched her take out parchment with hands that no longer shook. She wrote one name only before folding the note. Severus Die. You trust him? Draco asked, contempt coming automatically because he had been taught to despise dependence even when drowning. I trust that he understands debt, Narcissa said. I won't have him do it for me. Her gaze came up. Do not flatter yourself. No one can do this for you. He sat awake until dawn in his old bedroom with the curtains open and the mark burning dark against the sheet. White peacocks moved below like ghosts in the lawn mist. He had spent his life thinking inheritance meant rooms, silver, names engraved in stone, the arrangement of ancestors along a corridor. By morning, he knew inheritance could also mean a task pressed like a knife into your hand by a monster who had learned your family's weak place and called it loyalty. A week later, he stood in Borgin and Burke's, pretending he had not learned anything at all. The shop was dim even by Nocturne Alley standards. Dust lay on the black cabinets and shrines in a way that suggested deliberate neglect rather than idleness. Mr. Borgin came out from behind the counter, rubbing his hands together, all false deference and sharp eyes. He had known Draco since childhood, had watched Lucius move through the premises with contempt disguised as custom. Now he looked at the son and measured loss as keenly as any banker. Mr. Malfoy, he said. What a privilege. Draco hated how much effort it took to make his sneer convincing. Spare me. Borgin's little eyes flickered. Of course. How may I be of service? Draco pulled back his sleeve just enough for the mark to show. Borgin went pale. Yes, Draco said. Thought that might help your memory. He made himself speak of the Vanishing Cabinet in a voice that sounded almost bored. He asked about its twin. He asked what repairs might be possible. He asked that if anything were to arrive at the shop unexpectedly, word should reach him at once. He pointed to the opal necklace under glass and the hand of glory on its stand. Not because he wanted them, not exactly, but because wanting dangerous things was part of the role he had been assigned, and because he had already learned that if one must lie, it helped to lie extravagantly. Borgin bowed and promised obedience. Draco threatened him one more time because his father would have. When he left the shop, his hands shook so hard he had to hide them in his sleeves. By September, the Hogwarts Express was full of rumor about his glory. No one said glory to his face. They said chosen, important, trusted. Pansy Parkinson watched him with the bright curiosity of someone eager to be nearest whatever power might be rising. Blaise Zabini observed him more quietly. dark eyes amused and skeptical. Crabbe and Goyle swelled with borrowed importance. Draco gave them all what they wanted. Lowered voice, half-finished sentences, enough menace to let imagination do the rest. Harry Potter found him before the train reached the school. Draco had felt watched from the moment he entered the compartment, but the feeling had become ordinary over years of schoolboy hatred. He did not locate the source until the others had gone, and he leaned to pull his trunk down. Then the sliding of fabric and the wrongness in the air near the luggage rack told him enough. He moved faster than thought. Petrificus totalis. Potter toppled from under the invisibility cloak, rigid as a board, shock still alive in his eyes. For one absurd second they only stared at one another. Draco felt not triumph, but panic, swift and sour. Potter had been listening. Potter would tell. Potter would trail him through every corridor until whatever thin chance remained was snapped in two. "You never learn," Draco said, because old lines came more easily than true ones. Potter's gaze blazed with accusation. Draco looked at the famous face, the infuriating certainty in it, and understood with a kind of helpless fury that there were boys who got to choose bravery because other people loved them enough to forgive the cost. Draco did not live in that world. He lowered the cloak over Potter's body again. His foot came down hard against Potter's face. Bone cracked wetly under the pressure. The sound sickened him. "Stay there," he said, voice rough. "Maybe someone decent will find you." Then he slid the compartment door open and stepped into the corridor full of smoke and September light and shouting children, carrying the taste of copper in his mouth like a secret. Hogwarts had always seemed to Draco like a machine built to reward certainty. The staircases moved, but they moved according to rules. The teachers contradicted one another, but the contradictions were familiar. Slytherins hissed and Gryffindors brayed and Ravenclaws frowned and Hufflepuffs endured, and the years arranged themselves by feast and frost and examinations. It was the sort of place where a boy could believe, if he were praised early enough and often enough, that the future had already been written somewhere flattering and only awaited his arrival. Now the castle seemed full of hidden mouths. Every corridor might overhear. Every tapestry might conceal. Every torch guttered as if in warning. Draco found, with growing disgust, that he was glancing over his own shoulder like a hunted first year. He did not boast. That disappointed people. Pansy expected conspiracy and flirtation, some sweet poisonous intimacy with the dark. She followed him around the first week in a way that would once have gratified him. When he failed to offer details, she tried to manufacture them herself. "It's true, isn't it?" she whispered one evening in the common room, leaning so near her perfume turned the air powdery. "About you being trusted. Mother says your family will be in the very center of things when it's done." Draco stared into the fire. "Your mother says whatever gives her something interesting to hear herself say." Pansy pouted. "You have changed. So have the times." "That's not the same thing." "No," he said. "It isn't." Blaise, lounging nearby with a goblet in hand, gave him a long look. "Leave him alone, Pansy. If he's brooding, it's probably expensive." "Nay." Ordinarily, Draco would have answered with something sharp enough to re-establish rank. Instead, he let the remark pass. It was easier to allow people to think him proud than to let them see the more humiliating truth. He was tired almost to delirium. The Vanishing Cabinet in the Room of Requirement consumed his nights and his concentration, and most of what had once made life feel solid. The room, when summoned for hidden things, unfurled like a city built of abandonment. Towers of broken furniture leaned over aisles full of dusty books, rusted cages, cracked globes, boxes of old uniforms, wardrobes no one dared open. In the middle of one long canyon of lost objects stood the cabinet, tall, black, warped in the wood, one door hanging wrong. Its twin sat in Borgin's shop. If Draco could mend this one, a path would exist between the castle and the alley, a wound cut clean through Hogwarts' skin. At first he had worked on it with the furious concentration of someone trying to solve a practical problem, and therefore avoid its moral shape. He cast mending charms until his throat went dry. He examined hinges, hidden compartments, the peculiar old magic sunk into the grain. He sent notes by owl to Borgin under false names and received maddeningly vague instructions in return. The cabinet resisted with a kind of exhausted malice, as though it had been broken not only in timber, but in intention. He preferred it that way. When he was with the cabinet, he could call himself busy. Failure had a surface there, split wood, unresponsive charms, the wrong resonance when he laid his palm against the side and listened for the twin. Outside the room, failure became what it really was. Katie Bell gasping under a curse. Ron Weasley turning blue from poison dye. Dumbledore breathing. Voldemort waiting. He had not yet reached those disasters. In the beginning, there were only smaller compromises, each one simple enough to name necessity and pass by. Madame Rosmerta was the first truly intolerable one. He caught her alone in the Three Broomsticks during the first Hogsmeade weekend, after watching her for half an hour with the cold patience Bellatrix had once praised in him as if it were a virtue. She was wiping tankards, humming under her breath. The pub smelled of beer and damp wool and roast meat. Outside, students jostled and laughed through the fogged windows. Draco stood before her until she looked up. "Is there something you need, dear?" she asked. He raised his wand. The curse left his mouth in a whisper because he could not bear to hear it loudly said. "Imperio." Her face went still. No drama. No flash. No visible surrender. That was what unnerved him most. A living woman disappeared behind her own eyes and left only obedience. He gave instructions with clipped precision, each one an attempt to reduce the future by degrees. Watch. Pass messages. Deliver an item. Touch nothing yourself if it can be helped. When he left the pub, a boy from Hufflepuff held the door for him and grinned some meaningless, cheerful thing about the weather. Draco nearly hexed him from the force of loathing he felt. Not for the boy, not even for himself precisely, but for the sickening ease with which the world had gone on while he had just reached into another person's mind and tied it shut. Severus Snape began watching him almost at once. Draco had expected offers, perhaps even commands. What unsettled him more was restraint. Snape let him pass in corridors. Snape called on him in class as though nothing in particular lay between them. Snape's gaze, when it fell on Draco's cuffed forearm, revealed nothing. Yet it was everywhere. That gaze, black and analytic and faintly contemptuous, as if Draco were both suspected and understood. On the fourth night of term, Draco came out of the room of requirement long after midnight and found Snape waiting in the unlit corridor. He was half concealed by a pillar, robes melting into the stone. The lantern he held threw up a narrow amber glow that painted one side of his face and left the other in shadow. "You are out of bed," Snape said. "So are you." An observation, not a defense. Draco felt the day's exhaustion turn immediately into temper. "Then assign me detention. If I wished to do that, you would already be serving it." They looked at one another. Somewhere far below, the lake made a slow noise against rock. The corridor smelled faintly of damp mortar and wax. Snape's eyes shifted to Draco's hands. "Your mother is worried." The words struck like a slap. "My mother," Draco said, "ought to mind her own business." Snape's mouth thinned. "She thinks this is her business." "Of course she does. And I agree with her." Draco laughed softly, ugly with nerves. "How kind. You are spending your nights on something that has very little to do with schoolwork." Snape moved one step closer. "If you require assistance." "I don't. If you think pride becomes you in this, you are a greater fool than I had supposed." The rage came fast because rage was easier than fear. "You just want to know what it is." Snape did not deny it. "Yes. So you can take it." A pause. Then, surprisingly, Snape said, "If that were my intention, I would not be asking." That was almost enough to stop him. Almost. Draco pulled his sleeve down harder over the mark, though it was hidden already. "I'm managing." Snape's gaze flicked once to the wall behind which the room lay hidden, then back to Draco's face. "Are you?" Draco stepped around him. He thought Snape might catch his shoulder, block his path, speak his name with authority. Instead, Snape let him go. That was somehow worse. The cursed necklace happened in October. All week Draco had been moving between classes in the cabinet with the peculiar weightless dread that sometimes comes before a fall. Rosmerta had the parcel. The girl was chosen almost at random, one of the careless consequences that dark magic delighted in making of chance. Draco had told himself, in the furtive, dishonest place where justification breeds, that the necklace need only reach the castle. Someone cautious would intercept it. A teacher would suspect. Dumbledore, if he touched it at all, would perhaps only weaken. There were infinite ways, he told himself, for disaster to blur and soften before becoming real. Then the castle filled with the story. Katie Bell, lifted into the air on the road back from Hogsmeade, screaming as if something invisible were rending her apart. Draco heard it first from Goyle, who enjoyed retelling the details and had no idea he was speaking them to their author. Later he saw the tremor of it still moving through the school. Girls clinging together outside hospital wing doors. Boys speaking too loudly to sound unafraid. Professor McGonagall's mouth carved into a line so hard it looked like injury. He could not stop seeing a gloved hand brushing chain, a seventh year's puzzled frown, the sudden convulsion of pain. He had not touched Katie Bell. That fact, which might once have comforted him, now seemed merely cowardly. Late that night in the room of requirement, he sent a cracked china teacup through the cabinet. It vanished with a sucking sound. He waited with his palm flat to the wood, breath held, listening for resonance from the twin. Minutes crawled. Then, from somewhere inside the cabinet's warped dark, came a muffled shattering. It had not survived the passage. He pressed his forehead against the door and laughed once under his breath, because failure had taken on a grotesque neatness. He could not send a teacup 3 feet through bad magic without destroying it, but he could nearly kill a girl by means of an object he had barely dared handle himself. When he came down to breakfast the next morning, Snape looked at him across the staff table and knew. Draco understood that instantly, and for the first time all year, he wanted very badly to be 14 again, and stupid enough to think dislike was the worst thing one wizard could read in another's face. Snow came early that year and made the castle look deceptively innocent. From the high windows the grounds appeared washed and simplified. Black branches inked over white, the lake a sheet of iron, footprints crossing courtyards like hurried thoughts. Students complained of frozen fingers, lost scarves, Quidditch wind. Draco envied them with a bitterness he would not have admitted under Veritaserum. Their lives still consisted of weather and homework and minor grudges. His own had narrowed into a corridor between impossible task and public collapse. The cabinet would not yield. He had progressed beyond smashed teacups to living creatures, because one slips by degrees into monstrosity and barely notices the steps while taking them. A bird returned from the cabinet with its neck twisted at the wrong angle. Another did not return at all. Draco had buried the first in the forest edge at dawn like a child ashamed of cruelty, then gone to class and mocked a Gryffindor and Transfiguration because maintaining one identity often required violence against another. By December he was sleeping in snatches, waking with his hand over the mark. His cheekbones sharpened. Crabbe and Goyle, disguised at his command with polyjuice and swaddled in girls' cloaks during Hogsmeade trips, lumbered after him with a devotion too stupid to be comforting. Pansy stopped asking questions and began simply watching, which was worse. Blaise asked none at all, which was somehow worst of all. It was after the last lesson before the Christmas holiday that Snape finally cornered him. The classroom had been emptied for the break. Desks stood pushed together like huddled old men. The fire under the grate had burned low. Draco had entered only because he thought it unused and needed a place to read Borgen's latest note without interruption. The door shut behind him. He turned, already reaching for his wand. Snape stood there with his own wand lowered, and his face set in that expression of irritated certainty which had made generations of students loathe him. There was fatigue around his eyes, Draco noticed suddenly. Not softness. Never that. But fatigue, old and ground in deep. "How long?" Snape asked. "Did you imagine you could continue like this?" Draco tucked Borgin's note into his pocket. "Continue like what?" "Like a child attempting subtlety by omission." "I don't know what you're talking about." Snape made a sound under his breath. Enough. One sharp movement of his wand, and the classroom windows sealed with a muting charm. Outside snowlight faded to dull gray. "Your mother came to me," Snape said. Draco's hand tightened invisibly in his robe. "I know. She was afraid for you. She should have been afraid of embarrassing herself. She was past embarrassment." That landed. Draco looked away first. Snape stepped nearer, close enough now for Draco to smell smoke and potion residue, the ordinary chemical life of a professor, absurdly grounding. "I made an oath," he said. "To protect you if I could, to assist you, and if it came to it." Draco's head snapped up. "You swore." "Yes." Something sharp and hot went through Draco that had almost nothing to do with gratitude. It was fury, yes, but shame knotted through it, and fear so intimate it resembled grief. His mother had gone to another man on her knees for him. The knowledge stripped something bare inside him. "You had no right," he said. "Neither did your mother. She exercised one anyway." "I didn't ask for help." "No," Snape said. "You asked for nothing. That is one of the problems." Draco laughed, but the sound came unsteady. "And the other problem?" "That you are failing." Silence. The fire shifted in the grate. Snape watched him with intolerable patience. "Tell me what has been attempted." Draco wanted with a childish violence to break every bottle in the room. Instead, he stood very still. "The necklace," Snape said. "I inferred your hand in it. Clever enough in conception, disastrous in execution." "Who else?" "Nuria." Draco swallowed. "Rosmerta," Snape said at once. The accuracy of it made resistance suddenly pointless. Draco looked down at the floorboards between them. "I had to have someone in Hogsmeade." "I know. I wasn't going to touch it myself." "I know that too." "I didn't mean for the girl." Draco. Something in the use of his first name without contempt or triumph cut him cleanly open. He had been braced so long for ridicule that plain address struck like mercy. His mouth moved before he had decided to speak. "I can't do it." The confession fell into the room and seemed to alter its shape. Snape did not answer immediately. The pause told Draco two things at once. First, that Snape had expected exactly this. Second, that expectation had not made hearing it easy. "Cannot," Snape said at last. "Or will not?" Draco stared at the low fire until the coals blurred. "Does it matter?" "Yes." He almost said no out of sheer reflex. Instead, because the room was charmed against listening, and because Snape already knew too much to be fended off by insolence, he told the truth. "I won't," Draco said. The word shook anyway. "Not with my own hand. Not if he's standing there looking at me. Not if it means." His voice failed. Snape's own went softer, which from him was more alarming than kindness. "It means what you think it means." Draco's laugh came sharp this time. "Do you say that to comfort me?" "I say it because sentiment wastes time." Draco dragged a hand through his hair. "Then you do it." The words were out before he knew he meant them. Snape's eyes narrowed slightly. "You are asking me?" "No." Draco looked at him full then, anger returning because he could not bear to seem pleading. "I am saying if anyone can, it's you. You're already his creature, aren't you? You can stand close without him smelling the lie." Snape's face changed by less than a fraction, but it changed. A lesser observer would not have caught it. Draco did because he had spent years waiting to see where a professor's mask ended. "Be careful," Snape said. "You asked what I meant. I mean, I know what he wants." Draco heard the recklessness in himself and did not stop. He doesn't only want Dumbledore dead. He wants me made into the sort of person who can do it. That's the point. If you do it for me, he still wins in another way. He gets me marked as a coward, and he punishes my mother for breeding one. You imagine he will show consistency in how he punishes, Snape said. He will not. Then what am I supposed to do? At that, Snape's expression did something extraordinary. It revealed weariness so profound that it bordered on pity. Survive, he said. Draco shook his head violently. That isn't an answer. It is the only answer most of us are offered. He hated him then for the bleakness of it. He hated him for being right. He hated his mother for swearing him into obligation, his father for landing in Azkaban, Bellatrix for loving monsters, Voldemort for making murder sound like filial duty, Dumbledore for existing like a white-bearded target at the center of all of it. Above all, perhaps, he hated the fact that his own conscience had waited until now to become troublesome, when it could save no one and satisfy nothing. I still won't let you take it, he said. Snape's brows lifted. You think I am hungry for it? I think if you do it, he'll know I failed. He may know that whether I do it or not. Then let him see me trying. Trying what? Snape said, and for the first time impatience cut through. Trying not to murder a man by nearly murdering anyone else within reach? The words struck like open-handed blows because they were deserved. Draco flinched. Snape exhaled slowly. Listen to me. There are ways through this yet. Your task is not the only game in motion. You sound like Dumbledore. I assure you, that is not a criticism I often invite. Draco almost smiled. The almost made him angrier. He sank onto the nearest desk, because his knees had gone uncertain. Snape did not stop him. After a long moment, Draco said, very quietly, if I let you help, and he suspects, yes, he'll kill her first. Snape looked at him a long time, and in that look, Draco understood that Snape had known this already, had perhaps built all his own choices around exactly that calculation. It was a disturbing realization. It suggested loyalties too complicated to map cleanly. I will do what I can for Narcissa, Snape said. What you can, Draco repeated. That sounds small. Most true promises do. The poison mead nearly killed Ron Weasley 2 months later. By then, Draco had convinced himself that a cursed bottle, properly directed, might be cleaner. Slughorn was vain. Dumbledore often drank what was offered him, and poison felt impersonal in a way Avada Kedavra did not. It did not look into your eyes. It did not ask your arm to straighten and your mouth to shape the syllables. Draco told himself anything he needed to move his own body through the steps. Then Weasley swallowed by accident, and Slughorn shouted, and Potter dragged Bezoars out of nowhere like a hero out of one of those stories that taught boys dangerously false lessons about Providence. The news reached Draco during supper. He set down his goblet and found he could not close his hand again for several seconds. Around him, the hall buzzed with speculation. Across the staff table, Snape's face became very still. Dumbledore's gaze, when it drifted from the students to Draco and rested there a moment too long, was unreadable. Yet Draco had the uncanny sensation of being seen not as he performed himself, but as he had become. A boy making catastrophe in widening rings because he could not consent to one clean, monstrous act. He left the hall before pudding was served and walked alone down to the lake. Snow had crusted over the shore. The water beyond was black and never still. He stood there with the mark throbbing dully under layers of cloth, and thought that evil had a trick of demanding absolutes while producing only collateral. He had wanted to avoid becoming a murderer. Instead, he was becoming the sort of coward whose refusals harmed the wrong people first. Behind him, in the darkness between the trees, a voice said, "There is still a difference." He spun, wand out. Snape stood in the shadow of an elm. A difference between what? Draco said. Between being driven toward a threshold, Snape said, and stepping over it of your own desire. Draco lowered the wand an inch. That sounds like something meant to make me sleep. No, said Snape. Sleep, I think, is lost to you for the year. Then he turned and went back toward the castle, leaving Draco by the black water with the absurd, infuriating sense that the man had offered comfort and refused the dignity of naming it. Spring did not rescue him. It came to Hogwarts in the usual order, snow softening to rain, rain giving way to wet grass and the smell of earth opening. But the change in season only made Draco feel more trapped. Time was visibly moving. The year, which had once seemed a vast field across which he might somehow wander until a solution presented itself, had narrowed to a path ending in a tower. The cabinet, after months of resisting, finally began to answer him. Not reliably, not kindly, but answer it did. An apple sent through one evening arrived in Borgin's shop with only a bruise. A second returned. Then a bird went and lived. Draco held it in both hands afterward, feeling the tiny throb of its heart against his palm, and nearly threw it from the Astronomy Tower simply because relief had become unbearable in any living form. Success was supposed to steady him. Instead, it stripped away the last delay he had possessed. The castle watched him grow thinner. Teachers did not say his name unless required. Students began stepping aside in corridors as if he carried contagion. Harry Potter watched him with such relentless suspicion that Draco sometimes wanted to turn and say, "Yes, yes, it's me. Look your fill. Perhaps your certainty will solve what mine has not." Then came the bathroom. He had gone there to be alone, which at Hogwarts was always a miscalculation. The floor was wet with ghost water, the mirrors clouded, the old taps greened by age. Moaning Myrtle hovered near the cracked ceiling, muttering to herself. Draco had become used to her as one becomes used to a wound that occasionally speaks. "You look dreadful," she said. "Thank you. You're thinner every time. Is that a choice?" "Do go away." She drifted lower, upside down, her pearly hair floating around her face. "It's always the handsome ones who are miserable. It's so wearing to witness." He leaned over the sink. His hands were braced on either side of the basin, hard enough to ache. The face in the mirror above the tap had become unfamiliar over the year. Older at the mouth, eyes too large from lack of sleep, arrogance eaten down to something sharper and less stable. "He'll kill them," Draco said to the porcelain, not meaning to speak aloud. Myrtle's expression altered at once. For all her vanity and melodrama, she had died young enough to remain keen to certain kinds of grief. "Who?" Draco let out a broken breath. "Does it matter?" "Yes. I can't do it," he said. The same confession he had given Snape. But here it came stripped of all pride. "I thought I could find another way. I thought if I delayed, if I made it clumsy enough, someone cleverer would stop it, or he'd tire of waiting, or something would happen." He laughed at himself in the mirror. "Something always happens, doesn't it? Just never the thing you want." "Nah, name day." Myrtle floated beside him now, unusually silent. "He keeps asking," Draco whispered. "In my head, in the mark, in every letter, in every silence. Do it, do it, do it, and I can't." His fingers slid on the wet porcelain. "I don't want to watch a man die because I told him to." That was when Potter appeared in the mirror behind him, pale and furious, and very real. Draco spun. "You..." Whatever might have followed was cut apart by instinct and terror. Wands came up. Spells struck tile and shattered the air into flashes. Potions bottles burst on the counters. Myrtle screamed and shot upward through a pipe. Draco was not dueling well. He knew that even within the duel. He was too tired, too raw, too shocked to see Potter there after speaking his own truth into the open. Potter looked equally frantic, as if months of suspicion had culminated in a moment he had not imagined clearly enough to control. Spells missed by inches. A basin cracked in two. Water burst in a silver sheet across the floor. Then Potter shouted something Draco had never heard before. Pain opened him. It tore across his chest and belly like a blade made of curselight. He hit the floor in water that turned red almost at once. For a second, he did not understand he had been struck. There was only astonishment at the warmth rushing out of him, at the impossible intimacy of death when it came near. Above him, Potter's face went blank with horror. Draco tried to breathe and could not. Snape arrived to the sound of Myrtle's shrieks and Potter's stunned stammering. He moved with a speed Draco had never associated with him outside combat. One glance, one barked command at Potter, and then Snape was on his knees in the flood, hands working over Draco with spells that seemed to stitch the air itself. The pain altered, softened at the edges, became a terrible distant hammering. Draco felt blood still soaking his shirt, felt Snape's grip at his shoulder and sternum, heard words not meant for him thrown like knives at Potter, heard the disgust and fear in them both. When at last he could breathe without drowning in it, he opened his eyes properly. Snape's face above him looked strange. Not frightened exactly. Furious, yes, and pale. But beneath the fury lay something much worse. Relief so violent it had almost unmade the mask. "Can you stand?" Snape said. Draco nodded, though he could not. Snape hauled him upright anyway, arm hard around his back. Potter stood apart in the wrecked bathroom with his wand hanging uselessly at his side, the expression on his face that of someone who had reached suddenly past his own intention and found blood there. Draco should have hated him then. Some part of him did. Another part, more lucid, thought with sick irony that this was what came of two boys each trying desperately to keep hold of his chosen version of events. Potter had wanted proof of guilt. Draco had wanted secrecy. Between them, the bathroom looked as if truth had exploded. As Snape steered him out, Draco glanced once over his shoulder. Potter's eyes met his. For the first time in their years of hostility, neither looked triumphant. The wound closed. The scar remained. Afterward, Draco found that fear had changed shape. Before, he had imagined death abstractly. The Dark Lord might kill him. Bellatrix might hand him over. Dumbledore might turn his wand faster than expected. Those possibilities had lived in the future. Lying on the bathroom floor with his own blood washing between broken sinks had taught him something much simpler and more destabilizing. He could die before any grand decision was completed. He could be killed by accident, by panic, by a classmate's half-borrowed curse. The universe was not ceremonious enough to wait for his moral climax. That knowledge made the cabinet's completion less like triumph than compulsion. 2 nights later, it opened cleanly. Draco stood in the room of requirement with his hand on the handle, listening to the faint echo of Borgin's answering knock from the other side. The sound was clear, direct, intimate as breathing through a keyhole. He had done it. He had built the passage. He had, in practical terms, delivered Hogwarts to invasion. He did not feel accomplished. He felt very young and very sick. A letter arrived the next morning in Bellatrix's sharp slanted hand. No signature, only a sentence. "Our Lord is pleased when doors open." Draco burned it over the common room fire and watched the ash curl. That evening, Snape came to him not in a corridor or classroom, but in the deserted Slytherin common room long after midnight, when the green lake light lay cold across the stone. "You succeeded," Snape said. Draco did not ask how he knew. "Yes." "Then listen carefully. When the moment comes, do nothing rash from desperation." Draco laughed without mirth. "You'll need to define rash." Snape's eyes held his. "If Dumbledore offers you mercy, believe him." The words struck deeper than any warning. "You think he will?" "I think he understands boys who are used as weapons." Draco wanted to sneer and say he was not a boy, not a weapon, not understood by the headmaster he had been trained to despise. Instead, he said the truer thing. "It won't matter. The others will come through. Bellatrix, Greyback, yes. And if I lower my wand?" Snape's face became unreadable again. "Then lower it for the right reason." "What reason is that?" "For your own soul," Snape said. It was such an old-fashioned word, soul, and so unlike Snape to speak it unmocked, that Draco almost forgot to be bitter. When Snape had gone, Draco remained by the black window until dawn silvered the lake. He pressed 2 fingers to the scar hidden under his shirt and thought of all the injuries a year could make. Mark, wound, hunger, dread, the slow erosion of certainty. His father had taught him that strength lay in never yielding. Dumbledore, if Snape was to be believed, might ask the opposite. Neither lesson had been meant for someone like him, and yet both had found him at once. The night came hot and airless, with thunder held back somewhere beyond the hills. From the moment Draco received Rosmerta's message that Dumbledore had left the school with Potter, the castle felt stretched on a rack. Every hour after that sounded too loudly. Every corridor seemed full of listening stone. He moved through the evening as if through dream water, carrying the hand of glory in one pocket and the knowledge of the cabinet in his bones. When the signal finally came, it was almost anticlimax. A tiny flicker from Rosmerta, a piece arranged, a return in motion. Draco stood before the cabinet in the room of requirement and opened the door. Bellatrix stepped through first, eyes shining. "You did it," she breathed, half laughter, half hunger. Behind her came Greyback, rank and grinning, then 2 more Death Eaters whose names Draco barely knew. The room seemed to shrink around them. Their presence had a smell, wet leather, old blood, cold iron, that did not belong in Hogwarts and therefore immediately contaminated it. Bellatrix seized Draco's face in both hands. "My sweet boy, I knew you would. I told Sissy she had bred steel after all." He pulled away. "Quiet." She threw back her head and laughed softly. "There he is." They moved through the hidden passages and shadowed corridors with dreadful ease. Rosmerta had done her part. The doors were placed, the patrols misled. Draco heard distant fighting begin somewhere lower in the castle, and knew the invasion had become real. It occurred to him wildly that he was about to meet Dumbledore before Bellatrix reached him if he took the right stair. He left the others below on the pretext of securing another entrance and climbed alone. The Astronomy Tower smelled of night air and old stone. The sky above was masked with cloud, but the moon kept finding rents in it and throwing silver across the battlements. Dumbledore was there. He stood near the parapet, one hand blackened and withered against the stone, the other holding his wand half lowered. He looked much older than Draco remembered, and much more dangerous for having abandoned any need to seem otherwise. Beside him, hidden under the invisibility cloak and frozen by some silent spell Draco had not seen cast, Harry Potter lay unseen but not unfelt. Draco sensed another presence immediately, as though the night itself held its breath around a witness. He raised his wand. Expelliarmus. Dumbledore's wand flew from his hand and spun over the stones. The old man swayed. For one exultant, dreadful second, Draco felt the intoxication of success. He had done it. He had disarmed Albus Dumbledore. The greatest wizard in the age stood before him weaponless, and the world had not cracked open. Then Dumbledore lifted his gaze, and the triumph died as quickly as it had come. "Good evening, Draco," he said. No fear, no contempt, no pleading, merely recognition. Draco's hand shook harder. "Don't move. I have no intention of doing so. Don't speak either. That may be more difficult." Below them the castle muttered with distant alarms. Bellatrix would come. Snape would come. The others would come. Draco had seconds, perhaps less, in which to do the thing for which a year had been built. Dumbledore studied him. The moonlight turned his lined face almost kind. Draco hated that kindness. It made everything worse. "You are not well," Dumbledore said. Draco laughed once, nearly choking on it. "That's what you choose. It is what I observe. You don't get to observe me." "I think," said Dumbledore gently, "that you have been observed a great deal this year." Snape's words came back with absurd force. "If Dumbledore offers you mercy, believe him." Draco tightened his grip on the wand until his knuckles hurt. "You know." "Yes." "Then defend yourself." "No." The single syllable hit him harder than if Dumbledore had flung curses. "I said defend yourself." "No." "Why?" Draco shouted, and the shout cracked at the edges. "Why won't you?" "Because you do not want me dead." The truth of it went through him like the bathroom curse, clean and merciless. He hated himself for how visible he must be. He had spent the year imagining that reluctance could be hidden behind craft, that conscience was private so long as one kept moving. Dumbledore had looked at him for less than a minute and named the center of the matter. "Hell kill my mother," Draco said. "Yes," Dumbledore said. Draco stared. "That's all." "It is not all. It is only what is true first." "Nah." The night pressed close. Wind pulled at Draco's sleeves. He could hear his own breath, too fast. "He'll kill my father too," Draco said. "If he's not dead already." "I know." "He'll torture them because of me." "Possibly." Draco's voice descended to a whisper. "And you stand there saying you know." Dumbledore's face softened in a way Draco could not bear. "Because I do know. I know what it is to be young and entangled in the ambitions of older, crueler people. I know what it is to be offered greatness at the cost of another's life, and call it duty because duty sounds cleaner than desire or fear. Most of all, I know this. Once done, murder does not leave the hand that performs it unchanged." "No." Draco's arm ached from holding the wand up. "You think I haven't figured that out?" "I think you have. That is why you are shaking." The clouds shifted. Moonlight swept across the tower and revealed the black rod of Dumbledore's injured hand. Death lived in him already. Draco saw that now. Some long corruption moving quietly toward the heart. The revelation did not comfort. It only deepened the obscenity. Voldemort wanted a dying man killed by a terrified boy because power loved the ear. "You can't help them," Draco said. "You can't hide them." "I can try." Draco almost sobbed in fury. "Try? That's your offer. It is a better offer than the one you serve." That silenced him. From the stair came footsteps. Bellatrix's voice floated upward, delighted and sharp. "Draco? Darling?" Panic flooded back at once. Draco's wand lifted higher by sheer reflex. Dumbledore spoke quickly now, still calm but no longer leisurely. "Lower your wand. Bring your mother to me. There are protections yet outside his reach." "You don't know him." "I know enough. Do not add your soul to his collection if you can avoid it." Soul again. That impossible word. Draco's hand began to lower without permission from the rest of him. Bellatrix burst onto the tower first, skirts snapping in the wind. Greyback came behind her, lips curled, followed by the others. Then at last Snape in black, breathing slightly hard from the climb. Bellatrix's grin vanished the instant she took in the tableau. "What are you doing?" she demanded of Draco. "Finish it." Draco did not move. Bellatrix's eyes widened with disbelief, then fury. "Do not humiliate me now." "I said I'd get him," Draco said. His voice sounded unlike his own. "I didn't say I'd kill him." Greyback laughed low in his throat. "Pretty child's grown tender." Bellatrix rounded on Snape as if blame might already be transferred. You've been poisoning him." Snape ignored her. His gaze moved from Draco to Dumbledore, to Draco again. It was a glance so quick no one else would have called it communication. Draco knew otherwise at once. Something old and arranged and terrible had arrived. Dumbledore looked at Snape over the heads of the others. Whatever passed between them was silent. Draco saw, with a rush of nausea, that he had stepped not out of a trap, but into one laid long ago by adults whose bargains ran beneath the visible world. "Severus," Dumbledore said. Bellatrix whirled, triumphant and suspicious all at once. "Yes, Severus. Show him." Draco's wand was half lowered now. He could not lift it again. The tower had become unreal. Bellatrix shouting, Greyback prowling, thunder muttering beyond the lake, the headmaster old and cornered and still somehow possessing the center of the night. Snape raised his wand. Draco wanted to speak. He did not know what word he meant to say. Wait. Wait. Don't. Why? Why? None seemed sufficient. The green light struck Dumbledore squarely in the chest. The force of it flung him backward. For one appalling instant he hung against the open night, robes blown out like torn wings, silver hair bright under the moon. Then he fell. There are silences so enormous that all sound afterwards seems to arrive from far away. Draco heard Bellatrix scream in exultation as if from underwater. He heard Hagrid's roar from the grounds, Potter's muffled movement under the cloak, Greyback laughing. Yet all of it came after the simple fact of Dumbledore's body vanishing into dark air. Snape caught Draco by the shoulder before his knees could give. "Move," he said. Bellatrix spun toward the stairs with her wand up. "Burn it!" she cried. "Burn the place, break them, take what you can." The Death Eaters poured downward. Snape's grip on Draco remained hard enough to bruise. "You killed him," Draco said, hardly aware he'd spoken. Snape did not look at him. "Move." They ran. The castle below had turned to chaos. Curses flashing through corridors, suits of armor crashing to life, students shouting, teachers answering. Smoke already threaded one stairwell where Bellatrix had set fire to hangings for the pleasure of it. Draco stumbled once over a fallen body and only later realized it belonged to one of the Death Eaters, blasted backward by a teacher's spell. Potter caught up with them on the grounds. He came out of the dark by Hagrid's hut like fury given limbs. Spells flew. Snape met them with brutal precision, not retaliating with the deadliest curses even when he could have. Draco understood only fragments between heartbeats. Potter screaming accusations, Snape deflecting. Snape driving him back not as one eager to destroy, but as one forced to preserve distance. "Run!" Snape barked at Draco without turning. Bellatrix was already beyond the gates, hair streaming. Laughter ripped loose into the night. Greyback bounded after her. Draco followed because there was nothing else to do. He reached the boundary wall and doubled over, retching into the grass while the mark burned on his arm like a brand fresh made. He had not killed Dumbledore. He had let death into the school. He had brought Bellatrix and Greyback and fire and panic. He had lowered his wand, and someone else had done what he could not. The distinction mattered. He knew it mattered. But under the enormous cry rising from the castle, it seemed for several minutes like the smallest distinction in the world. By the following summer, Malfoy Manor no longer belonged to the Malfoys in any meaningful sense. Its walls were theirs, yes. Its silver and cellars and peacocks and acres of yew still answered to the legal structure of inheritance. But ownership had become a joke with Voldemort at the head of the table. He had taken the house the way fire takes a beam, not by removing it, only by making it serve another purpose while the damage spread inward. Lucius returned from Azkaban before the school year began. Returned was too generous a word. Azkaban yielded him like something waterlogged and gnawed. He had lost weight. His hair, once so carefully tended that it had seemed part of his authority, hung dull at the shoulders. The old elegant disgust remained in him, but it no longer traveled outward as power. It clung close, self-consuming. The first time Draco saw him again, he experienced a sensation very like the one he had felt at his own reflection in the bathroom mirror. Shock at the discovery that a person can cease to resemble the legend through which one has previously understood him. Lucius embraced him with real feeling. That, too, unsettled Draco. Affection had never been absent from the house, not exactly, but it had mostly worn formal clothing. Now his father's arms tightened around him with the raw desperation of someone who had seen too many cells. "You did not," Lucius began, and stopped. "He meant you did not do it yourself. He meant your hands are still clean enough for me to claim you. He meant I do not know if that is relief or danger." Draco heard all of it. "No," Draco said. Lucius closed his eyes briefly. "Good," he whispered, so quietly even Narcissa may not have heard. Then the meetings began. Death Eaters came and went through the front doors at all hours, trailing mud and blood and the smell of travel. The drawing room where Draco had taken the mark became a war room. The dining chamber became a theater of humiliation. Voldemort liked to sit at Lucius's own place and rest his long fingers on silver once chosen by generations of Malfoys. He liked to ask questions to which no answer could be safe. He liked to watch people fail in their attempts to anticipate his mood. Charity Burbage died over the soup. She hung above the table, suspended and trembling, pleading not for life exactly but for recognition, for the memory that she had taught some of the people seated beneath her, that she was a person and not merely an example. Draco could not meet her eyes. Beside him, Narcissa had gone very still. Lucius stared at his plate as if the skill required to breathe were almost beyond him. When Voldemort killed her, the curse flashed green across polished silver and white linen and crystal. Nagini fed in front of them all. Bellatrix watched with worship. Draco sat with his hands in his lap and tasted his own hatred so sharply it felt medicinal. That night he walked the house until dawn. The long gallery of ancestors seemed ridiculous now, all those painted men with pale hair and proprietary mouths. They had spent centuries arranging marriages, properties, alliances, convinced that continuity itself was victory. Yet one serpent-faced man had crossed the threshold and rendered their legacy into a banquet hall for terror. Draco stopped before his grandfather's portrait and thought, "None of you built anything strong enough to refuse evil when it arrived bearing your own values exaggerated into monstrosity." At Hogwarts, nothing improved. Severus Snape was headmaster now, though the title sat on him like a chain rather than a prize. The Carrows ran the school's daily cruelty. Amicus taught dark arts as appetite. Electo taught muggle studies as slander. The corridors smelled of fear more openly than they had in Draco's 6th year. Bruised mouths appeared at breakfast. Students flinched when doors opened. Crabbe and Goyle prospered in it. That might have been the ugliest revelation of all. Given a regime that rewarded intimidation with consequence-free delight, they became almost exuberant. Pansy adjusted with efficient self-preservation. Blaise drifted through untouched, cynical enough to survive anything so long as it required no public courage. Draco discovered that cowardice could take several forms, and not all of them looked the same from outside. He did not join the resistance. The very word would have seemed laughable spoken over him. He still despised public heroics. He still had a quick tongue and a defensive sneer. He still thought in reflexive hierarchies, and had to catch himself when old blood prejudices rose automatically to the surface. Yet he found he could no longer participate in certain things without feeling the bathroom floor beneath him. Dumbledore's eyes on the tower. Hermione Granger's old, furious face in classes where he had once delighted in baiting her. Year by year and jeer by jeer he had spoken the ideology of blood because it had been the weather of his house. Under the Carrows he saw what happened when weather became law. A first-year Hufflepuff forgot to bow properly to Amicus, and was assigned detention that meant cruciating spiders in front of older students, until he was sick. Draco stood in the room with the others, wand in hand, and when the boy's turn came, he stepped into line first and deliberately mangled the incantation badly enough that Amicus called him a useless aristocratic ornament and sent him out in disgust. It was not bravery. It was evasion. But the boy's hand shook less when Draco passed him in the corridor later. On another evening, he found 2 Ravenclaw girls hiding in an unused classroom with contraband copies of the Quibbler tucked under loose floorboards. One began to cry when she saw him, assuming betrayal. Draco stared at them for a long moment, then said only, "There is a patrol on the 3rd floor landing in 8 minutes," and shut the door behind him. Small acts. Miserable acts. Acts that did not topple the Carrows or save the school or make him a different person overnight. He knew how unimpressive they were. Yet they accumulated, and with them accumulated a new understanding so humiliating he could hardly bear to name it. Decent behavior was often dull. It did not feel like triumph. It felt like inconvenience, risk, missed opportunities, silence swallowed instead of spat. He had been raised to think virtue, when it existed at all, should look impressive. In practice, it more often looked like leaving a door unlocked and not taking credit. Snape saw more than Draco ever told him. They spoke rarely. Once in the headmaster's office, while the portraits of dead schoolmasters snored or pretended to, Snape asked without preamble, "How many detentions have you redirected this month?" Draco, leaning against the desk with all the old insolence he could muster, said, "I can't imagine what you mean." Snape continued, marking a parchment. "Then I advise you to improve your imagination." Draco's mouth twitched to spite himself. "If you know, why not stop me?" Snape looked up. "Because I am busy stopping worse." That was as close to alliance as they ever came. Letters from home arrived irregularly. Narcissa wrote little and always between the lines. "Survive. Be cautious. Do not trust Bella when she smiles." Lucius wrote longer, arguing strategy, influence, optics, the importance of appearing steadfast until power settled again into proper hands. Draco read those letters with increasing coldness. Proper hands. He could no longer hear the phrase without seeing Charity Burbage hanging over his father's own table while Lucius looked down and said nothing. By spring the castle had learned how to endure itself. Secret passages carried whispers. The walls became partisan. Even Peeves seemed selectively loyal. Draco moved through it like someone half-haunting his own life. He had a borrowed authority he did not want, and a family name that opened some doors while quietly sealing others. Then Easter neared, and he was summoned home for several days. The note bore no details. It did not need them. A summons from Malfoy Manor during the final year of war meant only that the house required witnesses to whatever ugliness was about to occur. He folded the parchment and stared out over the grounds. Down near the greenhouses, a knot of younger students crossed the lawn under escort, heads bent together against the wind. He felt suddenly, absurdly jealous of their companionship. He had spent his childhood cultivating superiority and entered his 17th year discovering that superiority made poor shelter when terror came to roost. As he packed that night, his hand closed around the empty space where his own hawthorn wand ought to have felt inevitable. It was still his then. It would not be for much longer. The spring evening the Snatchers brought prisoners to Malfoy Manor arrived with rain that made the windows look melted. Draco had been home less than a day. The house was in one of its false lulls, a period of tense relative quiet between summonses. Narcissa oversaw dinner she did not expect anyone to eat. Lucius wandered from room to room with the restless purposelessness of a man who had once believed himself central to history, and now suspected he was merely trapped inside it. Bellatrix had come early, which meant trouble by itself. Voices rose in the front hall just after dusk. Rough voices, eager and overlapping. The sound of men hoping for reward. Draco knew that sound. It carried the peculiar greed of lesser predators who have stumbled upon prey too large for them and want an authority to witness their luck. He met Bellatrix in the corridor outside the drawing room. Her eyes were fever bright. "Come," she said. "You may be useful for once." In the hall below, Fenrir Greyback and a pack of Snatchers stood dripping on the black and white tiles. Between them, roped and disarmed and filthy from the road, were prisoners. One of them was Granger. Draco recognized her instantly, not because she looked as she had at school, but because even terror had not made her smaller. Mud streaked her face. Her hair hung tangled and wild. There was a split at her lip. Yet she met Bellatrix's approach with hatred intact. That, more than anything, dragged old-school memories violently into the present. He saw parchment stacked beside her elbow in the library, her hand shooting up in class, the withering look she had always given him when he said something inherited and foul because he knew it would wound. The boy beside her was swollen in the face by some jinx, half hidden under bruising. His features were distorted. But the eyes... Draco's stomach dropped. There are certain people one knows by the force they exert on a room before they speak. Harry Potter, bruised beyond easy recognition, still possessed that infuriating gravity. Even disfigured, he looked like trouble refusing to die. Ron Weasley stood beside him, white and furious. A goblin cowered nearby. Another small figure Draco did not immediately place huddled behind them. Greyback grinned at Bellatrix. Thought you'd want to look before we sent for the Dark Lord, Dia. Bellatrix's gaze had already snagged on the sword in the Snatcher's hands. Godric Gryffindor's sword, or what seemed to be. Panic, sharp and private, flashed across her face. Draco had never before seen Bellatrix frightened by anything but displeasure from above. The sight chilled him more than the prisoner's arrival. "Take the mudblood," she said. "Upstairs." Granger fought. Bellatrix struck her. The crack of the blow rang through the hall. Draco stayed where he was because movement had become impossible. Then Bellatrix turned and seized Potter by the jaw, wrenching his swollen face upward. "And this?" she demanded. "Is it him?" Everything after that seemed to separate into layers. On one layer, the hall, the rain, Bellatrix's nails and Potter's skin, Lucius stepping forward with desperate hunger, because identifying Harry Potter might restore a shred of favor. On another, the memory of the tower, Dumbledore saying "you do not want me dead." The memory of the bathroom, Potter staring at his own damage and horror. The memory of Charity over the table. The knowledge that if he named this face, Voldemort would come at once. Potter looked at him, not pleading. Potter did not plead, but something in the gaze was terribly naked nevertheless. It said only, "Choose." Lucius spoke first. "Well, is it?" Draco heard his own heartbeat like a fist. The safe answer, the useful answer, the answer he had been trained all his life to give when family and danger collided, was yes. Instead, he said, "I can't tell." Lucius turned on him. "Look again." "I am looking." Bellatrix's stare was murderous. "Do not play games." "I'm not." Draco forced himself to step closer. The lightning-swollen face, the broken nose, the dark hair filthy with rain. Objectively, there was room to doubt. That fact became his shelter. It might be him. The features are wrong. Lucius leaned in, frantic now. "The scar. His hair's over it." "Move it, then." Draco did not move it. He kept his eyes on Potter's ruined face and said more firmly, "I'm not sure." The silence that followed was brief, but immense. Narcissa came down the stair halfway, one hand on the banister. Her eyes went from Draco to the prisoner and back again. Something in her face sharpened. She understood at once, not because she knew Potter by sight and disguise, but because she knew her son and the precise quality of strain around his mouth. "The face is badly swollen," she said coolly. "He may be mistaken." Bellatrix cursed. Her mind had already turned fully toward the sword and what it might mean if the vaulted Gringotts had been entered. Potter ceased, for a crucial minute, to be the center of the room. That minute saved everything and nothing. Granger was dragged upstairs to the drawing room. Her screams began soon after. No rhetoric Draco had ever heard in school. No dinner-table certainty about blood and breeding and inheritance survived contact with that sound. It was not abstract. It was not ideology. It was pain stripped of adornment, a human being made into a lesson by someone who enjoyed lessons too much. Draco stood in the hall below with his wand loose in his fingers, while Bellatrix's voice rose and fell overhead, silken with cruelty. Lucius paced. Narcissa sat once and stood again. The goblin whimpered. Weasley strained against his bonds until Greyback kicked him to his knees. "Do something," Lucius hissed to Draco, though what he wanted done was unclear even to him. "Summon Voldemort?" "Confirm Potter? End the noise upstairs? Restore the house? Restore himself?" Draco thought, with a kind of stunned detachment. This is what we Maiden called purity. He had used the word mudblood often enough for it to feel almost casual in his mouth once. Hearing Bellatrix spit it between Granger's cries turned the word to rot. It did not sound like wit or family or victory. It sounded exactly as ugly as it always had been. Then the house cracked. It was not a structural sound, not at first. It was the popping apparition of a house elf, where no house elf should have appeared, followed by shouts from below, followed by the impossible sight of Dobby racing into the room with eyes huge in his narrow face. Dobby. For an instant, Draco was 11 again in his father's study, listening to the elf's terrified apologies after some minor disobedience, seeing Lucius's contempt, his own childish absorption of that hierarchy as naturally as breathing. Harry Potter had freed Dobby years ago with a sock and a trick, and the story had become a family embarrassment told with snarling resentment. Now the elf stood in the wreckage of the Malfoy's own hall, free enough to return with rescue blazing in every movement. Chaos erupted. There were bodies everywhere at once, Potter and Weasley surging up from below, Granger stumbling bloodied from Bellatrix's grasp, Lucius shouting, Bellatrix hurling curses, Narcissa pulling sideways to avoid a spell, Greyback roaring, the chandelier swinging madly overhead. Draco moved because everyone moved. His wand came up because every wand came up. For 2 seconds he and Potter were almost face to face in the middle of broken glass. Neither cast. Potter's hand shot out instead. The hawthorn wand tore free of Draco's grip as if it had been waiting all year for another owner. The sensation of loss was unexpectedly physical. His palm went cold. Potter looked startled by what he had done, but he did not hesitate. He pivoted, sending a curse at Lucius, then another at Bellatrix, then grabbing Granger toward the drawing room window where Dobby was already wrenching the latch open with frantic magic. Draco could have shouted. He could have tackled. He could have named Potter then and there with all certainty restored. He did none of it. Bellatrix saw the escape an instant too late. Her knife flashed as she hurled it. The prisoners vanished with a crack of elf magic before it struck. For one beat the room held only smoke and overturned furniture and Bellatrix's shriek of rage. Then, from somewhere outside in the night, too far to stop and yet near enough to hear, came a small, terrible cry. Dobby. Narcissa closed her eyes. Bellatrix turned on Lucius and Draco, both in a frenzy of accusation. Greyback swore. The Snatchers backed toward the walls like men realizing belatedly they had arrived for more than a bounty. Draco stood among shattered crystal and scattered silver, wandless, and understood that the choice he had made in the hall had acquired consequences at once intimate and mythic. Potter had escaped. Granger had escaped. Dobby had died for it. And the hawthorn wand, worn from Draco's hand moments before, had gone with them into the dark. Later, when Voldemort's rage descended on the house in full, Draco learned how little mercy there was in saying I could not be sure. The Cruciatus does not distinguish between active treachery and failed usefulness. Yet even under that white-hot agony, even listening to Bellatrix scream his cowardice into the stones, Draco found there remained inside him one small place that would not relinquish the image of Potter's face under the swelling and the rain, waiting not for friendship but for truth. A borrowed wand never truly becomes part of the hand that holds it. Draco learned that in the weeks after Malfoy Manor. The replacement, his mother's old spare, balanced differently, walnut instead of hawthorn, cast spells well enough when required, but the magic moved through it as through a borrowed coat, serviceable, alien, faintly humiliating. Every time he lifted it, he thought of Potter's fingers closing around the hawthorn handle, and felt again that cold little rupture in his palm. Voldemort's fury after the Manor escape had turned the house into a series of aftershocks. Lucius wore new fear openly now, like illness. Bellatrix could not stop replaying the breach, looking for blame that would not implicate her. Narcissa moved with the careful economy of someone who had discovered that panic wasted strength needed elsewhere. When Draco returned to Hogwarts, she touched his cheek only once and said, "Survived the spring." He might have laughed once at such plainness from her. He did not laugh now. The castle had grown sharper-edged during his absence. Rumor moved through it with impossible speed. Students whispered about the Manor escape, though no one ought to know details. Potter's name, which the Ministry and Voldemort's followers had spent months flattening into propaganda, regained among the young its older, dangerous quality. Not certainty of victory, but proof that the story was not settled. Draco found himself listening for signs of movement he would previously have tried to stop. A hidden passage door left not fully latched. Scuffed footprints where no official patrol had passed. A bit of charmed parchment vanishing beneath a sleeve at his approach. His own contribution was still paltry and covert. He turned wrong at the right times. He misreported numbers. He told Amicus that the sound he had heard on the 6th floor came from Peeves, when in fact he knew, from the hurried shape of silence, that students had been meeting nearby. None of it absolved him. None of it prevented beatings already given or curses already cast. Yet he kept doing it. One wet April evening he found a first-year Slytherin girl weeping in an alcove outside the Charms corridor. Her hands were blistered from a punishment spell gone wrong. At another time he might have walked past and thought only that younger students were always melodramatic. Instead he stopped. "Why are you sitting in the passage?" he asked, sharper than intended. She scrubbed at her face at once, mortified to be caught. I couldn't make the door work." "What door?" "The one near the tapestry. They said it opens if you ask for somewhere to hide, but it wouldn't." Draco stared at her. The room of requirement, then. The rumor had spread farther than he realized. "You asked badly," he said at last. Her lower lip shook. "Can you show me?" He ought to have refused. Association was dangerous. Also, absurdly, the room felt in some perverse sense still his after the cabinet and the months of secrecy. Yet the sight of her raw hands and stubborn efforts eroded whatever instinct towards self-protection remained. He walked her to the tapestry and showed her how to pace, how to think clearly about need rather than fear. The door rippled into being. She looked at him with open astonishment. "Thank you. Don't use my name in there," he said. "I wasn't going to." A pause. Then, with the solemnity children sometimes bring to unbearable times, she added, "I know you're not like them." Draco almost flinched. "You know nothing about me." She slipped through the door. It sealed behind her. For several minutes he remained in the corridor listening to rain strike the narrow windows. "You know nothing about me," he had said. And it was true. Yet the sentence gave him no comfort. Increasingly, he suspected that the self he had spent years composing so carefully at school, cruel when observed, lazy in inherited opinions, certain of his own elevation, was not a solid thing at all but a series of habits. A series of refusals might unmake habits. That possibility, once unthinkable, now followed him like an accusation and a hope. Snape passed him on a stair 2 nights later. The headmaster's face had become more drawn in recent months, his watchfulness harsher. Rumors clustered around him too. Some said Voldemort consulted him constantly. Others said he was trusted less than ever. Draco no longer tried to guess the full shape of Snape's position. The man existed inside too many bargains. "Have you heard?" Snape asked without pausing. "Heard what?" "Gringotts." Draco stared. "What about it?" "Break-in." The word dropped between them like stone. For one wild instant, Draco thought of Bellatrix's panic over the sword, the vault, the cup. Then he thought of Potter, of course, because somehow Potter remained the gravitational center of every collapse in the world Draco currently inhabited. "Was anything taken?" Draco asked. Snape looked at him a long moment. "Enough." Then he continued up the stair and vanished into the dark. The next day, Voldemort's rage struck the school like weather. It was not physical, not at first. It moved through the mark in Death Eater flesh, through messages, through the sheer change in atmosphere. Teachers paled. The Carrows became jumpy and brutal in a more frantic way. By evening, everyone in the castle knew that something crucial had shifted. Voldemort wanted something, had nearly lost it, and his appetite was narrowing toward Hogwarts. Night fell heavy and windless. Draco could not sleep. The borrowed wand lay on his bedside table, wrong even in stillness. Then, close to midnight, alarms began. Not bells. The subtler alarms of a castle waking to intrusion. Doors slamming open on their own. Feet pounding corridors. A cry from Ravenclaw Tower. The sudden ugly thrill in Amicus Carrow's shout. Students sat bolt upright in the dormitory. Crabbe was on his feet first, face bright with greedy excitement. "Potter's here," he said. The certainty in his voice made Draco's stomach turn. Goyle grinned like a dog catching a familiar scent. Around them, boys grabbed robes, wands, rumors. From somewhere high above came the echo of a woman's scream, abruptly cut off. Then, another noise. Voldemort's name not spoken exactly, but invoked. Summoned. He's come, Draco thought. Or he will. The castle has finally become the center of the war instead of its threatened edge. He moved through corridors filling by the second. Students poured out half-dressed. Teachers tried to herd them. The Carrows shouted conflicting orders. At the top of a stair, he glimpsed Snape once across the melee, face pale as paper, cloak already turning. Professor McGonagall emerged opposite him with fire in her posture and wand up. Their duel cracked the air like splitting oak. Draco did not wait to see the outcome. For one thing, the outcome was suddenly clear. For another, the old geometry of authority had shattered in that instant. Headmaster against deputy, Death Eater against defender, masks falling because the castle no longer had time for them. By the time Voldemort's voice rolled over the grounds and through the stones, promising an hour and demanding Harry Potter be delivered, Draco was already halfway to the Great Hall with Crabbe and Goyle on either side of him, feeling history contract around the choice of whether to keep walking. The Great Hall was full when Voldemort's ultimatum ended. Students, teachers, defenders from Hogsmeade, members of the Order, parents who had somehow reached the castle in time. Everyone pressed together under floating candles that looked obscene in their usual calm. The dead were already being counted in whispers, though the battle had barely begun. On the dais, Professor McGonagall stood rigid with command. Near one wall, Draco saw Pansy, eyes darting, looking for the strongest current to enter. Then Harry Potter came into the hall alive and visible, and every old story about him seemed suddenly too small for the room. The reaction split along more than house lines. Fear, relief, fury, admiration, opportunism. Each face chose its own. Pansy's voice cut through first, shrill with calculation. "There he is! Grab him and hand him over!" 100 eyes swung. Draco did nothing. That was the true measure of his change, perhaps. Not that he rose nobly, not that he denounced her, not that he marched across the hall to Potter's side in some theatrical public redemption. He only did nothing. He did not support. He did not point. He did not move. Yet in a room built all year on coercion and immediate obedience, the refusal to move felt enormous. McGonagall acted at once. The Slytherins were swept out under guard amid shouts and outrage. Some protested, some sneered, some looked secretly relieved. Draco let himself be carried in the stream as far as the corridor beyond, then slipped sideways at the first confusion of traffic. Crabbe saw him and followed. Goyle, never understanding anything half so well as momentum, lumbered after both. "You heard her," Crabbe hissed once they were clear. "If we find him..." "We don't hand him anywhere," Draco snapped. "We get him to the Dark Lord ourselves." The compromise disgusted him even as he made it. Yet fear for Narcissa and Lucius still lived in him like a reflex. He could not shed that in a single hall of witnesses. He could, however, keep Potter from Crabbe's interpretation of delivery, which likely involved immediate torture and clumsy glory. They found the room of requirement almost by accident and inevitability combined. Draco knew where Potter might go because the room had become the secret architecture beneath his own year of doom. If Harry sought hidden things, if he sought an object, if the castle were choosing its cleverest concealment, there. The door opened into the room of hidden things and memory struck Draco so hard he nearly stopped walking. The great dusty canyons of discarded objects still rose in dim towers under the vaulted ceiling. The Vanishing Cabinet stood somewhere in that maze. So did months of his own fear, invisibly preserved in the air. Then he saw them. Potter, Weasley, and Granger were halfway down an aisle near an ancient bust wearing a tarnished tiara. Potter had turned at the sound of the door. For one instant, all six seemed suspended in the strange museum light of the room. Not enemies so much as survivors of the same school, standing among the wreckage of everything it had hidden. "You," Weasley said, as if the word itself were a fist. Draco lifted the borrowed wand. "Don't," he said. Crabbe laughed. "Don't what?" "Don't kill him," Draco said, still looking at Potter. Granger's eyes narrowed. "How generous." Potter's gaze flicked once over Draco's shoulder to the others and back. He understood immediately what Draco had actually managed to offer. Not safety, only a smaller danger than the one flanking him. "Move aside," Potter said. Crabbe shoved past Draco. "Like hell." The next seconds shattered into pursuit. Weasley and Granger bolted down one aisle, Potter another. Spells blasted old cabinets and splintered crates. Cages burst. Dust filled the air. Draco ran not because he had a coherent plan, but because the room itself made stillness impossible when magic began tearing through it. He shouted twice at Crabbe to stop using lethal curses. Crabbe ignored him both times with the heedless zeal of someone who had finally mistaken permission for power. "I said no killing," Draco yelled. Crabbe wheeled on him with a face Draco had never seen before. Ecstatic, mean, almost adult in the ugliest way. "You don't give orders anymore." Then he unleashed fiend fire. Even in a world that had taught Draco to expect monstrosity, the thing exceeded expectation. Fire became animals at once. Serpents, hunting beasts, a flock of burning birds with iron beaks, rising from the floor in a roaring tide that had intention in it. The room, full as it was of old magic and dry wreckage, turned instantly to tinder. Heat punched the breath from Draco's lungs. "Idiot!" he screamed. Crabbe was already backing away, horror finally breaking through his thrill. Goyle bellowed. The cursed fire leaped aisles and consumed them whole. Towers of junk collapsed in blazing avalanches. Potter appeared above the flames on an old-school broom, Granger and Weasley already clinging to another. For a wild moment Draco thought they would escape and leave him to what he had helped make. The notion was almost fair enough to accept. Then Potter swung back. The broom skidded low through smoke and impossible heat. Draco caught a glimpse of his face through the ash, set, furious, alive. "Take my hand." Draco did not think. He jumped. Potter hauled him onto the broom by the forearm with brutal force. A second later, Weasley and Granger swung close enough for Goyle to scramble onto theirs sobbing and singed. Behind them, the room became an inferno of cursed beasts devouring centuries of hidden things. One of the fire serpents caught Crabbe full on. His scream vanished almost instantly inside the roar. They burst from the room just before the door consumed itself. Draco hit the corridor floor hard and rolled. Smoke poured after them, then stopped as the room sealed. For several seconds no one moved. Everyone coughed, spat soot, breathed. Weasley was the first to regain enough composure for hatred. "We should have left you." Potter did not answer. He was looking at Draco instead. There are deaths so awkward that no language improves them. Draco, flat on the stones with his lungs burning, thought of the bathroom, the manor, the tower, the hall. Potter had saved him. Again the distinction mattered. Again he hated that it did. "Why?" Draco managed. Potter stared as if the question itself exhausted him. "Because I'm not you," he said, and turned away. The words ought to have wounded. They did. Yet there was something inside them not merely accusatory, but diagnostic. And Draco could not quite deny its justice. Not you. Not yet. Perhaps not ever. Still, he had been pulled out of fire by the boy he had failed to identify beneath bruises. The battle raged on without waiting for his understanding. Somewhere in the castle Fred Weasley died. Somewhere Remus Lupin and Nymphadora Tonks fell. Somewhere Neville Longbottom and others kept fighting among rubble and grief. Draco drifted through those final hours half-detached, reunited only briefly with his parents near the entrance hall when Voldemort's call to ceasefire forced both sides into terrible stillness. Then the forest. Narcissa went with the others because Voldemort commanded it. Draco was kept behind in the captured crowd near the edge of the grounds. He did not see Harry Potter step from the trees to meet death. He saw only the green flare in the distance, and then the procession returning. Hagrid carrying a body, defenders broken around them, Voldemort striding in triumph he had long rehearsed. Narcissa walked beside the Dark Lord, pale as moonbone. Later, much later, Draco would ask her what she had seen when she knelt over Harry's still form in the forest. She would say very little, only that she had touched a heartbeat under a shirt torn by battle, and that he had whispered one question to her before she rose. "Is Draco alive?" In that instant, she told him years later. She knew that the war's final lie would be built on motherhood rather than ideology. She asked if her son lived. Potter said yes. She stood and told Voldemort the boy was dead. Now, in the Great Hall's ruin at dawn, Draco could only watch what the lie had purchased. Voldemort, convinced of victory, called for submission. Defenders hesitated. Then Harry was suddenly alive in their midst once more. The hall erupted. Spells crossed like storms. Bellatrix fell to Molly Weasley's rage. Lucius grabbed Draco's sleeve and Narcissa took his other arm, not to drag him toward Voldemort but away from him. That choice, small and instinctive, may have saved them all. When Voldemort and Harry finally faced one another clear of the melee, the room seemed to contract around them. Draco understood almost none of the wand lore Harry spoke aloud, only fragments about allegiance and mastery, and a wand taken at the manor. But one fragment struck hard enough to lodge. The Hawthorn wand Draco had lost had carried more consequence than he had guessed. In being disarmed by Harry, he had helped disarm Voldemort elsewhere, invisibly, along the strange secret currents by which wands judged ownership. The final curse rebounded. Voldemort's body fell with a mundane heaviness Draco would remember all his life. No smoke, no dramatic dissolution. Only a dead man on stone, reduced at last to the human scale he had spent decades trying to transcend. The silence after was not pure relief. Too many dead occupied it. Yet within that silence, the mark on Draco's arm went abruptly still, as though some constant background command had been cut at the source. He looked down at the black tattoo and felt, not freedom exactly, but the first imaginable shape of it. After a war, the world does not divide neatly into heroes and villains with clean paperwork between them. There were hearings, of course. Interrogations. Inventories of cursed objects. Lists of the dead. Lists of the disappeared. Testimony given by the newly bereaved to the newly exhausted. The ministry, under Kingsley Shacklebolt's steadier hand, wanted both justice and survivable continuity, and those aims did not always meet gracefully. The Malfoys arrived at their first formal hearing dressed as they had always dressed for public judgment, perfectly. Lucius wore mourning black, and looked, for the first time in Draco's memory, genuinely uncertain that appearance could save him. Narcissa carried herself with the same cold poise that had once navigated drawing rooms, and now navigated tribunals. Draco stood between them not because he wanted to, but because position mattered in courtrooms as it had always mattered at dinners. He had considered refusing. In the end, he came because refusal would have been one more form of performance, and he was beginning to tire of performing. The Wisengamot chamber smelled of old wood and ink and a century of pronouncements. Faces turned as they entered. Some were hostile, some fascinated, some merely curious to see whether the old family would finally crack in public. Harry Potter testified before Draco did. He looked older than the months between battle and hearing justified. So did they all. There was a scar of fatigue under his eyes that victory had not erased. When he spoke, the chamber listened in a way it had not listened to anyone else that day. Fame survived war. So, apparently, did credibility. "He did not identify me at the manor," Harry said. A murmur ran through the benches and was silenced. "He lowered his wand on the tower," Harry continued. "Professor Dumbledore offered him a chance to stand down because he knew Draco didn't want to kill him. Snape's memories confirm the arrangement around Professor Dumbledore's death. Draco let Death Eaters into the castle, and people were hurt because of it. That part is true too. But he did not cast the killing curse. In the last battle, he didn't fight for Voldemort." The testimony was maddening in its fairness. Draco might almost have preferred blanket condemnation to the precise list of mixed guilt and withheld absolution. Later, outside the chamber while clerks changed over parchment and judges whispered together, Draco found Harry alone in a corridor lined with dusty busts. Neither had chosen the encounter. That made it easier. "You didn't need to do that," Draco said. Harry leaned one shoulder against the wall, tired enough to dispense with false modesty. "Yes, I did. Because you owe me for not naming you." Harry looked at him for a long second. "Because accuracy matters." Draco laughed softly. "That sounds like Granger." "It probably is." The laugh turned, before he could stop it, into something closer to genuine amusement. They stood in the silence that followed without comfort and without immediate hostility. That, too, was new. "I never thanked you," Draco said at last, the words abrasive in his mouth. "For what?" Draco thought of the fire in the room of hidden things, of a broom stooping out of smoke, of the sheer bewildering irritation of being saved by the one person he had spent adolescence trying to degrade. "You know what for." Harry's expression did not soften, exactly, but it changed. "You don't have to." "Perhaps not." Another silence. Then Harry said, "He didn't want you to do it, you know." Draco's gaze sharpened. "Who?" "Dumbledore." Harry looked past him a moment, as if seeing instead a pensive basin, a silver thread of memory, a man dead before dawn. "And Snape. Snape made the vow to your mother. Dumbledore was already dying. Snape killed him because Dumbledore asked him to, and because it kept Voldemort from forcing you to do it later." The corridor seemed to tilt slightly. Draco had known there was arrangement on the tower. He had sensed it. But knowledge from inside suspicion and knowledge confirmed by the person who had watched Snape's memories were different things. For a moment he was 17 again beneath moonlight, seeing two men exchange a look and understanding too little. "He never told me," Draco said. "Snape told almost no one anything useful in a way anyone would have appreciated at the time. That, absurdly, felt true enough to survive grief." Draco looked down at his own hands. "I spent a year hating him." Harry made a small sound that might have been agreement. Most people did. The hearing spared Draco Azkaban. Spared was not absolution. He surrendered dark artifacts from the manor vaults. He answered months of questions. He provided names of shops, caches, habits, family connections. Some whispered that the Malfoys had bought their survival. Others said Narcissa's lie in the forest had saved them all, at least indirectly. Both things were partly true and partly insufficient. Lucius never recovered gracefully. He tried at first to reassemble influence from remnants. Old acquaintances received invitations. Gifts were sent. Certain discreet overtures made. Draco stopped him where he could. "We are not going back," he said one evening in the library while Lucius dictated a letter meant for a former ministry ally. "Burn it." Lucius looked up slowly, incredulity and offense reviving together like old pets. "Do not address me as if I were a child. Then stop behaving like one." The letter trembled between them. Narcissa, seated nearby with accounts open in her lap, did not intervene. Lucius's mouth thinned. "You think humility will restore us?" "No," Draco said. "I think honesty is the only thing that might leave us worth restoring." The word worth seemed to strike deeper than any insult. Lucius burned the letter. He did not forgive Draco for forcing the choice, but he obeyed. That, more than affection, marked the permanent alteration in the household. Power had changed hands not through inheritance exactly, but through collapse and the refusal to rebuild the same shrine. The house itself changed slowly. Several drawing rooms were closed for a year. The dining chamber where Charity Burbage had died was stripped and repaneled, though no renovation fully cleansed memory from the stone. Dark objects went to ministry custody or were destroyed on the grounds under supervision. The peacocks remained because Narcissa liked them and because not every symbol deserved extinction. Yet the house grew less theatrical, more habitable. Windows opened. Curtains were drawn back. Servants no longer crept. It was during that quieter reconstruction that Draco met Astoria Greengrass properly, not across a ballroom, or in one of those careful post-war gatherings where people pretended the dead merely occupied another room, but in the manor gardens while she was visiting Narcissa with her sister. Astoria had always been considered delicate by people who mistook gentleness for fragility. Draco discovered quickly that she was neither frail nor especially impressed by old names. She looked at him as if he were a man and not a cautionary tale, which was disorienting. She also possessed the unnerving habit of asking simple questions whose answers one could not hide inside elegance. "Are you happier now that people distrust you openly?" she asked once while they walked along the clipped yews. He turned to stare. "What sort of question is that?" "A practical one." He considered then, because dishonesty with her felt both difficult and pointless, answered it. "Yes." "Why?" "Because before, they admired things in me that ought not to have been admired." Astoria nodded as if this were entirely unsurprising. "Then open distrust may be healthier." He married her because the thought of not doing so became progressively more impossible, and because, with her, the future ceased feeling like inheritance and became instead a set of decisions one could make on purpose. When Scorpius was born, Draco held him with terror unlike any he had known in war. War terror was external, directional, full of enemies and orders and visible lines of threat. This was the terror of responsibility stripped bare. A child sleeping against your chest does not know your family's history until you give it to him. He does not know which words are poison until you choose whether to pass them on. Looking down at his son's face, so impossibly new and unmarked, Draco understood with almost painful clarity that blood meant nothing unless accompanied by instruction, and instruction could damn as thoroughly as any curse. He did not raise Scorpius in ignorance. Silence breeds its own myths. When the boy was old enough to ask why some people look twice at their name, Draco told him a version of the truth that a child could bear. "Our family believed foolish things," he said once, "in the greenhouse where rain tapped softly on the glass and white roses climbed iron frames. Some of us were cruel, some were cowards, most were both at different times. You are not responsible for what was done before you were born, but you are responsible for what you do with knowing it." Scorpius frowned, serious as only children can be when offered a burden they do not yet understand. "What if people expect bad things because of our name?" Draco thought of the tower, the manor hall, the hall at the battle, the court chamber. Years of being looked at as if his family were a prophecy. He touched the boy's hair. "Then disappoint them," he said. On the 1st of September, years after the war, Platform 9 3/4 smelled of steam and owl feathers, and the peculiar ache of time repeating without actually returning. Families clustered under the high glass roof. Trunks banged. Children tried to act older than they were. Adults tried not to remember all the versions of themselves that trains had once carried away. Scorpius's hand was cold in Draco's. Astoria stood on his other side, smiling too brightly in the way she did when emotion pressed hard under composure. "Suppose I'm in Slytherin," Scorpius said for perhaps the third time. Draco crouched so they were eye level. "Then be a good Slytherin," he said. "What does that mean?" It was a question worth the whole line of his life. He glanced once beyond the boy and saw, a little distance away, Harry Potter with Ginny and their children. For an instant, the platform held all the strangeness of what had happened and what had not. Enemies become witnesses, witnesses become fathers, history boarding the train in smaller shoes. Harry met his gaze. No smile. No grudge visible enough to perform. Only acknowledgement. Draco looked back at his son. "It means," he said carefully, "that house is never the best thing about you. And it means that when the world asks you for something ugly in the name of loyalty, you learn to say no before it teaches you how expensive that word can be." Scorpius considered this with grave concentration. "Did you have to learn late?" "Yes," Draco said. The whistle blew. Children surged toward the doors. Astoria kissed Scorpius's temple. Draco straightened and handed over the trunk. The boy hesitated only once before boarding, which Draco took as a good sign. Too much confidence was dangerous. Too much fear could be inherited. Hesitation meant thought. As the train began to move, Scorpius leaned from the window and waved. Draco lifted a hand in return. Steam drifted between families, turning faces into apparitions for a moment before the wind carried it aside. He stood watching until the scarlet carriages dwindled and the platform's noise began folding back into ordinary station bustle. Beside him, Astoria slipped her hand into his. Across the thinning crowd, Harry Potter gathered his own family and turned away toward the arch. The future, Draco thought, was not something the dead had arranged after all. It was simply a train one sent children onto with better instructions than one had received oneself, and a promise, private, imperfect, renewed in every ordinary act, that whatever names had done before, they would not decide everything now.